NFL teams are wheeling and dealing in advance of the upcoming trade deadline, and the Chicago Bears should stay out.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast at Locked On Bears on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. On the show today, we explore why the Chicago Bears should stay quiet at the NFL trade deadline and not get involved in any of these blockbuster deals going around the league. On Monday, we see Davante Adams goes to the New York Jets. Amari Cooper goes to the Buffalo Bills. Heck, even running back Cam Akers goes back to the Minnesota Vikings. Teams are making big trades, and this is not the time for the Chicago Bears to get involved. Listen, I get it. We always want to see your team go out and make the big splash, the big move. You want to see that addition that's going to make your team better and put them over the top. But the Chicago Bears right now are not in a position where they should be giving up long-term draft assets in order to make the team immediately better for 2024. They need to think longer term and bigger picture over the state of this roster right now, because draft picks are how you build a long-term successful winning franchise. It's the best way to build your team is through the draft and keep your pipeline of young developing players stocked. And if you keep trading away draft picks at the trade deadline every year, yes, you'll acquire some good players, but you're not going to have the young, affordable, cheap players on rookie contracts that fill out the rest of your roster if you keep trading away draft picks for veterans that are older and more expensive. Especially when you start to think about looking ahead for the Bears beyond the rest of 2024. They have young players coming up on the end of their current rookie contracts that are going to need big contract extensions that are going to start taking up some of the extra salary cap space that you have from not having to pay the quarterback position nearly as much with Caleb Williams on a rookie deal. You look ahead to guys like Tevin Jenkins. He's going to be a free agent this offseason, and based on the start of the 2024 season, we're not sure exactly how much you want to pay and lock into Tevin Jenkins just now, but the remainder of this year will go a long way towards determining whether that's someone the Bears are going to pay top dollar to be a long-term foundational piece of this offensive line, or on the flip side, if you don't pay Tevin Jenkins, then you need a new starting left guard or right guard next season. Really both. You're going to need a new starting right guard anyway, because you don't really have one right now. And if you don't re-sign Tevin Jenkins, then you're going to need two starting guards. And unfortunately, you're not going to find a great starting guard available on the trade market. We'll talk more about that here in a little bit, but teams don't want to just trade away good starting offensive linemen in the middle of the season. So you've got Tevin Jenkins set to need a big contract or a replacement if you don't give him a big contract this offseason. And you look ahead to the following year. When you have young players that you want to keep around, you tend to give them a contract extension a year early before they're going to hit the open market, before the final year of their contract. So someone like Braxton Jones at left tackle is coming. Well, next year will be the last year of his rookie contract as a 2022 draft pick. And it's the same conversation. I don't know if we all are on board with giving Braxton Jones a big contract based on what we've seen at left tackle. But if you don't end up paying Braxton Jones, you're going to need to address the left tackle position some way, somehow. And maybe that's with draft picks or maybe that's with salary cap space. But either way, if you're trading draft picks for expensive players at the trade deadline, you have fewer draft picks to address the other positions you need to fill and also less salary cap space to address the other positions you need to fill. Kind of burying the lead here because the two big contract extensions that are looming that are much less question marks than Tevin Jenkins and Braxton Jones are in your secondary. Jaquan Brisker and Kyler Gordon, your 2 second-round picks from the 2022 NFL Draft. Next year will be the last year of their rookie deals. And typically you want to get that contract extension done heading into the last year of their rookie deals, unless you have any questions about whether you want them to be around long-term and you need to see one more year of that deal. But it's better to lock them up sooner than let them have another great year and cost that much more money. So this upcoming offseason, the Bears could very well hand out a big contract to Jaquan Brisker, a big contract to Kyler Gordon, maybe a big contract to Tevin Jenkins. Probably not a big contract to Braxton Jones just yet, but that could be on the horizon if he takes a step forward and really kind of settles into that left tackle spot. So you've got young players that are going to need new contracts, and you also have other veteran players that are going to be leaving this team soon that will be entering free agency soon, that you'll either need to hand another big contract to or replace in the same way we're talking about with Tevin Jenkins. I mean, you look ahead to Bears free agency this upcoming year. Tevin Jenkins, Keenan Allen are kind of the 2 biggest names hitting free agency this offseason. So if you want to re-sign Keenan Allen, that's going to take a significant amount of salary cap space, or you're going to need to find some way to replace Keenan Allen with another wide receiver, either via the draft or with some more salary cap space. Then, on the defensive line, Darrell Taylor, who the Bears traded for, will be a free agent. Running back Khalil Herbert as well. Any of those 4 guys could be re-signed for the Bears and require some salary cap space. Or if you're not re-signing them, you're drafting a replacement or you're spending money to replace them elsewhere. And then you look ahead to 2026, the year after. I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves here, but we talked about Brisker and Gordon, but then Kevin Byard will be a free agent that year. TJ Edwards will be a free agent that year. DeMarcus Walker will be a free agent that year. Andrew Billings will be a free agent that year, as well as Braxton Jones. So within the next 2 years, you're going to need long-term answers at number 3 wide receiver, left tackle, left guard, right guard, center, defensive end, nose tackle, and maybe a linebacker position in there as well. Both safeties, a corner if you don't end up re-signing these players. So with all of those guys that are entering free agency here in the next couple of years, you're either going to need to pay them more money or use salary cap space to replace them or use draft picks to replace them. And so if you're trading away draft picks at the trade deadline to get players, that's less salary cap space and fewer draft picks you're going to have to fill a lot of these different holes. This is how you got to stay ahead of roster turnover over the years. As some of those guys get older, some of those guys are young players are going to cost more. You could make a trade at the deadline right now to try and get a player to address one of those spots. But at some point, those players that you trade for are going to cost more and more and more, and you're going to build up all the salary and still have a bunch of other guys here to really replace on your roster. So the more prudent move is on a Bears team right now that's not hitting their Super Bowl window just yet. You don't need to go all in on 2024. This is not the year to go all in at the trade deadline. This is not the year to make your team, that much better for the last 8 games, the last 10 games of the 2024 season. You don't need to give up premium draft picks to get a guy to boost you this year. What you need is players who are going to be long-term solutions for your team, which sometimes you can find on the trade market, but are a bit more rare. So we'll look at why a lot of the names circling around out there right now don't make a lot of sense for the Bears at this trade deadline, unless something really extreme happens. But even then, I don't know that that's even the best move for the Bears either. So kind of continue why standing pat's going to be the better option, barring something super unexpected happening near the trade deadline. Next on Locked On Bears. The Locked On Bears podcast is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs, because LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm guessing you might be on LinkedIn, and if you're not, a lot of your friends, family members, and coworkers are all a part of LinkedIn. And that's why it isn't just a regular old job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals that you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job, but might be open to the perfect role. In any given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. So hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Locked On Bears is also brought to you by PrizePicks, the better way to play daily fantasy sports, because with PrizePicks, you are in complete control. PrizePicks sets stat projections for every player, and you pick more or less on at least 2 player stat projections, and you can win up to 100 times your money. Unlike the other daily fantasy platforms where you're setting a lineup and then competing against everybody else's lineups, no, this is just you versus the house. It's a lot of fun. It's not just football, but basketball, baseball, hockey, soccer, you name it. They've got projections across all of your favorite sports leagues and teams. So download the PrizePicks app today and use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Your $5 lineup doesn't even have to win. They're going to add $50 instantly into your account when you play $5 after downloading the PrizePicks app and using that promo code LOCKEDONNFL. PrizePicks, run your game. This year's trade deadline doesn't look like one that will be very advantageous for the Chicago Bears to be involved in. The Bears need to be thinking long-term with any potential trades they're going to make at the deadline, any kind of blockbuster trades. We'll talk a little bit later about, okay, if you want to trade a 5th-round pick for a rotational guy or a 6th-round pick or a 7th-round pick, that's fine. But I'm talking about 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th-round pick level trades for like high-impact players. This Bears team doesn't necessarily feel like it needs that one high-impact player just for the rest of this season. Of course, adding good players to your football team will make your football team better. It's not as though the Bears could not be improved by adding a player at the trade deadline, but it's more so the value of adding a player to make your team better right now versus the value that those draft picks can be over the course of 4 or 5 years, depending on the pick, and the long-term value that draft picks can play towards building out your roster. Like, I think any player you would trade for right now in 2024 can't be for 2024. Like, if you're trading for a player in the next 3 weeks or 2.5 weeks, whatever it is before the deadline, it's early November. If you're trading for a player right now, you're trading for that player because of what they're going to do for your team in 2025, 2026, 2027, and maybe even 2028. Any trade you make has to be for the next 5 years, not the next 10 games. That's why the trade for Montez Sweat last year at the deadline made so much sense, because you weren't trading for Montez Sweat last year so that he could make the Bears a playoff team in 2023. They traded for Montez Sweat so they could lock him into a long-term contract and so he can help you reach your goals in 2025 and 2026 and be a part of the team in 2024 and help this defense be better, right? That trade for Montez Sweat was not about that season that they traded him for. It was a trade for the long-term future. And so when I see Chicago Bears fans daydreaming about, say, Hassan Reddick from the New York Jets, that doesn't fit the type of player that the Chicago Bears would want to go after at a trade deadline. Yes, he's looking for a long-term contract extension, but also Hassan Reddick is 30 years old. That's not ancient in NFL terms, but when you talk about a guy in his prime, he's nearing the end of it, especially because he's already missing half of this season, and we don't know exactly even what shape he would be coming into if the Bears traded for him. I mean, perhaps he would be fine and ready to go, but there's going to be a learning curve even just coming to Chicago for the rest of this year. And you feel like the benefit of Hassan Reddick really doesn't start as much until next year, 2025, when he's 31. Okay, so maybe you get one good 31-year-old season out of Reddick, then he's 32. Then you start to get a little bit of a drop-off there, and then 33, there's a drop-off. And hey, you've already signed him to this long-term contract, whatever that is, a 2, 3, 4-year deal, and you're going to be paying him a lot of money when he's 33 or 34 years old at the end of that deal. That doesn't feel like it's in the best long-term interest of the Chicago Bears to give up a premium draft pick, whatever that might be, maybe not a first-round pick for Reddick, but a second-round pick, a combination of day 2 draft picks to get Hassan Reddick for half a season this year when you're not really trying to win the Super Bowl this year. I mean, you're aiming for the Super Bowl, but this is not the Super Bowl year for the Chicago Bears. Like, that's the next 3 years after this year are when you're really trying to get to the Super Bowl. And that's when you can have the trade deadline conversation about, okay, can we get this guy that's going to put us over the top for the rest of this year? And you can think a little bit more short term when you're trying to really maximize that moment in Caleb Williams' rookie contract. But Caleb Williams' rookie season is not the year to go all in on someone like Hassan Reddick at this stage. Like, it's the same reason why the Bears didn't end up trading for Matthew Judon, who the Patriots ended up trading to the Atlanta Falcons. Like, yes, the Bears were pursuing him, but I think you can look back on that feeling good because Judon is 32 years old. He's not going to be a long-term piece for the Bears. And yes, they were only offering a fourth, so it's easier to sort of take a short-term guy for a fourth-round pick, much like they did with Keenan Allen. But I think it's the same idea, right? They should be thinking longer term about building up this roster, whether that's an edge rusher like Hassan Reddick, or I know people say, oh, can the Bears trade for a new guard or a new center? And we mentioned this briefly earlier, but like, show me the NFL team that has a really good quality guard or center that you would want to trade for, that they also would be willing to give up. And I don't think there's a player in the NFL that really fits both criteria there, that you would feel really good about and that the team would want to give up. Teams don't just trade away really good starting quality offensive linemen. They'll trade offensive linemen who have questions, injury questions, age questions, contract questions, expense, but there's not really that player that's a perfect fit for the Bears as an offensive line trade. Like, the only conversation we could start to have about a big Bears trade deadline trade is any of the players that are already unrealistic. You see Chicago Bears fan dream up scenarios where the Raiders trade away Max Crosby, or the Cleveland Browns trade away Myles Garrett, or the Dallas Cowboys trade away Micah Parsons. And it's like, oh, if the Bears could get that player at the deadline, that would be the big move to make. And I'll grant you that pretty much any of those 3 players there are a little bit more of that long-term type of fit there. I mean, Myles Garrett's 28. I think he's the oldest of the 3. He's not old by any means. Like, these guys are still young enough and in their prime that, okay, hypothetically, if any of those 3 players were available, it would be worth a discussion. But first of all, none of those players are available. Even Max Crosby tweeted, he got a lot of controversy because he tweeted a hashtag that was RN4L, and people thought he meant the N-word when he used the N there, but it's Raider Nation for life. Not, I mean, he's a white guy, and you get the point, right? Raider Nation for life. He just tweeted talking about Antonio Pierce, and like, he wants to stay there and be there even through the thick and thin. And the Raiders certainly have no incentive to trade a really good young player. The Cleveland Browns, same story. Like, they have no incentive to trade Myles Garrett away. I know things are going poorly for them, but like, if they're going to sell, it's not going to be Myles Garrett that gets sold. And the Dallas Cowboys are not going to be sellers under Jerry Jones right now. And Micah Parsons is also injured right now. Like, none of those guys are realistically available for the Chicago Bears. And even if they were, I think there's a debate to be made whether it's truly worth it, because Crosby, Parsons, or Garrett, or whoever, you're going to have to give up multiple major draft picks. Is it worth a first and a second, or multiple firsts to go get those guys? I mean, maybe. Then that's a separate debate that we don't need to do the whole debate here for this hypothetical that's not even realistic. But like, that's multiple premium draft picks that can build up young, talented players for the foundation of your roster. I mean, that's a first-round offensive lineman and a first-round defensive lineman. And maybe neither of those players will ever be as good as Max Crosby, Micah Parsons, or Myles Garrett, but they're going to be cheaper and better value. And when you're thinking about the long-term building of your football roster, what's going to be more important for them? It's debatable. I'm not here to say no. I'm not here to say no, never. But I will say no, never, that those guys are going to be available and that Ryan Poles is going to pull the trigger on them. So it's not worth getting your hopes up for the pipe dream of Crosby, Micah Parsons, or Myles Garrett, because it's just not going to happen at this stage. And I'm not positive it's in the best interest for the Chicago Bears anyway. So that's where it's like, there's not a good player to go out and trade for, and it's not good strategy for the Bears to be making any sort of win now type of trades at the deadline. So in theory, then, it should be a quieter trade deadline for Ryan Poles. That doesn't mean no moves whatsoever. It just means no blockbuster moves. But there's a couple players that maybe the Bears could consider trading away, and you could trade a late round pick for a player from another roster to fill out your depth a little bit and add a rotational guy in Chicago. So we'll look at what the trade deadline could look like, even if it's quiet and avoids some of the blockbuster deals, next on Locked On Bears. The Locked On Bears podcast is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, America's #1 sportsbook. And right now, you can get your season started with a big return on FanDuel because they're going to give you $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. So your bet doesn't even have to be successful, but you place a $5 bet and they're going to add $200 in bonus bets right into your account, win or lose. There's no Bears game this weekend to bet on, but you can bet on any of the other football, action, college football, women's basketball. NBA is coming back into full swing now. Baseball playoffs, hockey's back in season now as well. Tennis, combat sports, you name it. They've got it all on FanDuel, all in their app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. So to get your $200 in bonus bets, guaranteed with your first $5 bet, visit FanDuel.com or download America's #1 sportsbook. The Bears aren't likely to be involved in a big splashy trade deadline, but that doesn't necessarily mean Ryan Poles is going to sit on his hands and do nothing. I mean, if there was a betting line on FanDuel for will the Bears make any trades at the deadline, I would bet on no. I would bet they don't make any trades this year. But Ryan Poles has made one each year he's been general manager, at least as far as I can remember. Get Chase Claypool 2 years ago and Montez Sweat this year. So that's where you wonder if he has some kind of small little move or trick up his sleeve. I'm just not sure exactly where a small move makes a huge impact on the Bears. Of course, if they have some kind of big injury between now and the trade deadline, maybe that could change things. But so far, the injuries have been short-term and minor enough, except for maybe at long snapper, that the Bears are okay. Like, does trading for another backup guard make this offensive line that much better? I mean, you got Nate Davis and Bill Murray on the bench already. Ryan Bates coming off of an injured reserve here soon. I'm not sure that another backup offensive lineman really moves the needle a ton for you because you've got plenty of backups. What you need is like a good one. But as we talked about earlier, teams don't trade away good starting offensive linemen in the middle of the season and leave a big hole on their own offensive line when they're all still trying to win games too, even if they're sellers at the trade deadline. So I don't know that trading for a backup offensive lineman for a 5th or a 6th or 7th round pick makes a big difference on the Bears right now. Like, same thing on the defensive line, right? We talk about, wouldn't it be great to get another great edge rusher to pair with Montez Sweat? Well, that doesn't seem realistic right now. And is there really any value to trading for another rotational edge rusher with a 5th, 6th, 7th round pick? I mean, you've got Darrell Taylor, you've got Austin Booker, Dominic Robinson is a healthy scratch every single week. Daniel Hardy is occasionally playing on the defensive line. Plus, you got DeMarcus Walker in there. Like, I don't think trading for a backup defensive lineman or a rotational defensive lineman makes a ton of sense either. Like, the Bears are feeling pretty good about their depth right now on this roster. I mean, heck, I'd almost consider like another wide receiver just for more wide receiver depth because I don't really trust DeAndre Carter and Tyler Scott isn't making that step forward. But even then, like, not really. It's just across the board. Like, unless there's just some young player that they absolutely love, I feel like the Bears can kind of sit tight here and not even worry about giving up a 6th or a 7th round pick or even a 5th round pick for some guy to come in and rotate at one of these positions where you kind of like the guys you have and you want the young guys that you have to get the playing time to develop. Because again, like, this year is more about player development and getting better than trying to actually win the Super Bowl this year. So why get in some of the way of some of those guys growing into longer term roles on your team? Like, I know we talked earlier this season about, any offensive lineman they could try and trade for from other teams. I mentioned Daniel Brunskill from the Tennessee Titans has some starting experience. He's their backup center, but I don't think he's a huge upgrade over Coleman Shelton or Ryan Bates at this point. You could go get an old guy like Brandon Scherf from the Jaguars. I mean, I guess, but I don't know. Like, is it that important to get an old guard there from the Jaguars who's going to be here for like a year and cost you a bunch of money and a draft pick? Like, does 10 games of a better right guard worth a 5th round pick? No. I mean, a 6th or a 7th, maybe, but I don't know. For now, they've kind of got things settled a little bit on the offensive line where you're not panicking and feeling like you just have to do something altogether. So I'm kind of feeling like, well, maybe the Bears won't make any external deals and bring in any outside players. But maybe they could still move one of their own guys. I mean, we also mentioned earlier this year a little bit about the idea of like, hey, Khalil Herbert is just sitting on your bench as not a healthy scratch because he's playing on special teams, but like Khalil Herbert is a quality running back still in the NFL. And I would imagine if I was a team elsewhere in the league that had injuries at running back, just needed something to boost my backfield in the ground game, I would call Chicago and see if I could get Khalil Herbert off of the bench there, because DeAndre Swift and Roschon Johnson are very clearly your number 1 and number 2 backs in Chicago. Khalil Herbert has not played on offense like the last 2 or 3 games now. And he might have been on the field for the kneel downs, but that's not the point, right? He has not received a carry or played a meaningful offensive snap in any of the last 2 or 3 games now. He will be a free agent at the end of this season. And so if he's just going to sit on the bench anyway, why not get a 6th or even a 7th round pick for him in a trade at the trade deadline? I mean, I like the idea of keeping Herbert on the bench in case you have an injury at running back. If Swift or Roschon Johnson gets hurt, I'd feel a lot more comfortable with Khalil Herbert going in there than Velus Jones. But maybe you trade Velus Jones instead. Like, it feels like you should trade one of those 2 players, because Velus Jones is now a healthy scratch every single week, inactive on game day after continuing to muff punts or muff kickoffs now, and not really carving out a role for himself on offense. So like, if the team that was interested in Velus Jones at the end of the preseason that we saw in Hard Knocks called back again, probably not for whatever they were offering at that time, but I'd trade Velus Jones for a 7th round pick at this point, because I think he's going to be cut before the end of his rookie contract anyway. You're never going to get any real value for him before his contract ends up. So if you could get even the latest of late round draft picks, a 7th round pick swap, whatever it is, if you could extract some teeny tiny little value for Velus Jones, why not at this point? He's not really adding much to your football team right now. And it's hard to envision a scenario where, you have an injury and you got to plug Velus Jones in and you're feeling good about that. Like, it just doesn't feel like he's worth it at this point. So, other than like, okay, if you traded Herbert, then Velus Jones is your number 3 running back. And even then, maybe there's something there, but you don't love that either. So if you're not going to trade Herbert, which at this point, maybe just hold on to him, then you might as well trade away Velus Jones at the deadline. Those are kind of the only 2 players. I mean, unless somebody wanted Dominique Robinson for some reason, but I don't think you're going to get much for him at this stage of the process. There's not much else that you really feel like is expendable that you want to get rid of that any team would really have interest in. Like, I don't think the Bears would want to trade Gerald Everett, and I don't know that another team would want to give up much for Gerald Everett given where his contract is right now, but he's playing enough on offense that I think the Bears value having him around. And if he wasn't out there, Mercedes Lewis is your number 2 tight end. Like, you need something else at tight end. So I think he's like just valuable enough to keep on the Bears, even if he's been kind of an underwhelming free agent signing at this point. So that's where I again come back to, I don't think the Bears are going to go trading for much at the deadline. And I don't think they're really going to end up trading away much at the deadline. They're not really in positions to be sellers. And I don't think they're in position to be a short-term buyer. It's only long-term buying. And like, there aren't a lot of guys available on the trade market that are long-term pieces to fill out the Chicago Bears. You never know what can change between now and trade deadline day. The right player gets discontent or whatever, but you look at the guys who are set to be free agents this offseason, like to try and find this year's Montez Sweat the Bears could trade for. There's not really a guy that fits the bill on the defensive line or the offensive line. And I don't think there's another position on the team that you would really want to give up any kind of draft picks to get an upgrade in the long term, because you feel like you kind of got things settled here for at least the short-term future at those spots. So gear up, buckle your seatbelts, and get your popcorn ready for a slow trade deadline. Like, I don't mean to be a bummer, a buzzkill there, but like, I don't expect a lot of fireworks there, and I don't think the Bears should be involved in a fireworks there. Like, it's a good sign for the state of the roster that they don't need to make big moves at the trade deadline. They're doing all right. Like, that can be a good thing that we can celebrate along the way through this process as well. Certainly, if the Bears surprise us and make any kind of trades, we'll be right here to break it down for you on the Locked On Bears podcast. So make sure you hit the subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. That's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. If you're looking for a second listen, check out Locked On NFL. Comes out twice a day with Tyler Rowland in the mornings and Tony Wiggins in the afternoons. A double dose of NFL football talk with the help of our local experts across the Locked On Podcast Network. Coming back tomorrow for another episode of Locked On Bears, because we're not going anywhere during the bye week. We'll still be here for you 5 days a week to give you 5 opportunities to bear down.